So if you were with us last week, you'll know that we began a brand new series called The Beginner's Guide to Predicting Your Future. And we thought about this idea that often in life, our actions have predictable outcomes. There's ways that people can be living that actually it's not difficult to predict where they're going to end up. And we had this principle that we explored last week and will carry us through this series. And although we got the principle from Jesus, it's not really a Christian thing or a church thing or a God thing. It's just a life thing. It's just a human thing, this principle. And the principle is simply this, that your direction determines your destination. That the direction you're moving in ultimately determines your destination and where that you are going to end up. And so if you're somebody who the direction in your life is that you're increase the amount of alcohol that you're drinking and you turn into alcohol when things are tough more and more and you're drinking more and more, that's a direction. That's a path that you're on. And it's not difficult to predict where that's going to end up. If you keep drinking more and more, where that's going to end up in terms of the impact on your relationships, in terms of your health and your finances, because the direction that you're walking in determines your destination. Or imagine that this sometimes happens to me in relationships, those people that you're close to, that you get into this situation where your direction that you're moving in is that you keep seeing all the negative things that they do. And as soon as you get up or you interact with them, you're spotting the negative things they're doing, and it's winding you up and it's irritating you, and you're snapping at them or you're correcting, and you've almost got these lenses on, these glasses that just sees all the bad things and all the negative things, the things that irritate you and the things that annoy you, and that's a direction. That's a path that you're in if you keep thinking that and seeing that, if that's what you think about all the time when you're interacting with them, and that's a direction that ends up in a destination. It ends up in a quality, certain quality of a relationship, whether that's with your partner or your kids or your parents or your friends. It's a direction that will determine your destination. And if you were around last week and you heard me teaching on that, or even just thinking about it now, you probably are thinking two things, or you thought two things last week. And the first thing that I'm sure that you thought and are even thinking now is this, that is so obvious. It's so obvious that the direction you're going in determines where you're going to end up. You know, it's just so obvious. But the second thing that I'm sure that you've thought even now or thought last week is that you can so easily apply it to your life. That you can think about different aspects of your life, whether your finances or your spiritual life or your relationships or your health or your work and your career, where the direction you're walking in is bringing you to a destination that you might not want to end up in, that you can easily apply it. And here's the thing. If it's so obvious that the direction you're going in determines where you're going to end up, if it's so obvious, and we all already know that, you already know your direction determines your destination, why do we have so many examples in our lives and in the lives of other people where they've not followed this principle, but this principle has impacted them? Either they've wanted to end up in a certain place in a positive way, but actually they don't end up there, or they end up somewhere where they don't want to be. If it's so obvious, how come it still applies to us that our direction determines our destination and we don't always end up where we want? That sometimes we never intend to be somewhere in terms of our work, or we never intend to be somewhere in terms of our spiritual dryness, or we never intend to fall out with work colleagues or struggle in our relationship with our kids or our finances or our health problems. We never intend to be in those places. But it's the direction we're in that ultimately determines where we're ending up. And there's a really interesting passage in James, the letter of James in the Bible. James was a brother of Jesus. So last week we thought about a parable of Jesus, and here's Jesus' brother James, who says some very similar things to what Jesus himself says. And in chapter 1, verse 22 to 24, this is what James says. He said, don't just listen to God's word. So if you're someone now and you're hearing it, he says, don't just listen to God's word. You must do what it says. Don't just listen, you must do what it says. Otherwise, you're only fooling yourselves. For if you listen to the word and don't obey it, it's like glancing at your face in a mirror. You see yourself, you walk away and forget what you look like. James says it's really important not just to listen, but to do something about it. And he said, if you hear the word, if you hear a message, but you listen to it, but you don't do anything about it, then that's really foolish, James says. It's as stupid or as foolish as looking at yourself in the mirror. Probably most of us, all of us perhaps, we look at the mirror many times in the day. We get up in the morning, we look in the mirror. Just before we're going to go out, and we look in the mirror. And James is saying that if you hear something, but you don't do something about it, you just hear it, that's like looking in the mirror and you see your glasses are on wonky, or you see your hair sticking up, or you see your colours don't match, or there's a blob of toothpaste on the side of your face, and you don't do anything about it. You just carry on with your day. James says that's foolish, isn't it? You don't look in the mirror. You look in the mirror to find things out in order to correct something. You correct how you look, or you correct something about your appearance, unless it's perfect. And James says you don't look and then not do anything about it. You don't just leave that toothpaste on your face, or leave that hair sticking up, or leave your collar sticking up, or whatever it might be. You see, and then you do something about it. Otherwise, that has an impact on your day. It impacts how other people see you. But sometimes, maybe often, we hear things that we know that we should do. We particularly if you're a Christian, a church person, you might read the Bible or hear messages like this, and you hear stuff, but then your life doesn't change that week. You don't necessarily do something about it. And because our direction and the things that we're doing determine our destination, why would we do that? Why would we hear something and not do something about it? I mean, why would someone look in the mirror and then not change anything about it? Let's think about this for a moment. Think about this. Think about for a minute the impact that you have on the world, or your ministry, or your volunteering, or your serving, whatever words you want to use, using your skills and talents to make a difference in the world. Think about what sort of impact you'd love to be having on the world in 2 years' time with the skills and talents that you've got. However you interpret that, what sort of impact would you love to be having on the world in 2 years' time? Or 5 years' time, or even 10 years' time? Or what sort of roles would you want to be in? What sort of impact would you want to be having on the world around you? Or think about financially where you're at right now. Where would you want to be financially in 2 years' time? What sort of financial life would you like to have? Financial resources at your disposal, but what you're doing about them in 2 years' time? Where would you love to be? Or 5 years' time, where would you love to be? What about your relationships? Pick your relationship with somebody who's really close to you. What would you like that relationship to be like in 2 years' time? In 5 years' time, what would you like that relationship to be like? Here's the thing, we all have intentions. All right, we all have intentions for all sorts of areas of our lives. And even if you're a goal setter, even if you're not a big planner, even if you don't set smart targets or whatever you want to call it, we all have intentions. It's not difficult to imagine what we'd like to happen in 2 years or 5 years in all sorts of different areas of our lives. But here's the thing. If you think about all the different areas of your life, you won't need to go very far before you find a disconnect between your intentions of what you'd like to happen in 2 years' time and your current direction in that area. It won't take you long if you just go through your health and you go through your relationship with God, you go through your kind of impact on the world, or your relationships with people, or your emotional life, or any other areas that you can think of. It won't go long before you think what my intentions are. There's actually a disconnect between the way I'm living now and my direction. My direction's going to take me somewhere in 2 years' time, but it's not actually what I intend or what I really want. And here's the thing, this is so simple, you're not going to think this is profound at all. But here's the thing, the power lies all with our direction and none of it with our intention. Where there's a disconnect between our direction and our intention, where we'd love to be in the direction we're going in, direction wins every single time, that you'd love to be a person who's overflowing with financial resources and you want to be generous and making an impact on the world. That's your intention, but the way you're living now is you're spending more than your income is. It's your direction that'll win every time. Emotionally, you want to be somebody who's full of the fruit of the Spirit and a generosity of kindness and love to other people. That's your intention. But right now you're harboring bitterness and jealousy towards other people and you think about it all the time and you're nurturing it. Direction wins every time. I remember when I was helping this couple who'd got into really serious financial trouble, and we sat down with the finances, and they had huge levels of debt that had accrued, credit card debt and some personal loans, and they were struggling to make ends meet. He had a decent job, and they had two little kids, and they met with me and we looked through their bank statements and looked at where they might be able to cut expenditure, and talked about some of the strategies that they might want to do. And against my advice, what they really wanted to do is to take all their debt. They wanted to kind of consolidate it and remortgage their house. And generally that's bad advice, because you make unsecured debt being secured debt against their house. And even though I said I'd get professional advice, but I thought that wasn't wise, that they went ahead and did it anyway. And as we were talking about their plan to do that, what became apparent is 5 years previously, they were in exactly that position with tens of thousands of pounds of debt on personal loans and credit cards. And in order to clear it, what they did is they remortgaged their house and paid that debt off over 25 years. And here they were now in exactly the same position. And that always struck me when I realised what had happened 5 years before. And I've lost touch with that couple, but if I speak to them and phone them up, I'm pretty convinced that they would have got into that position once again, maybe 5 years later, because their direction that they were going financially hadn't changed. Their intention was to be debt-free and they would say all the right things. But actually their direction and they were living, they were unable to make some of the hard choices about cutting and limiting their expenditure. And they just ended up in exactly the same position, that the power is in the decisions and the direction that we might take, not in our intentions. And so why is that disconnect? Why is it that there's a disconnect between our intentions and actually what we end up doing? Paul, one of the early church leaders, in one of his letters to the church in Rome, and there's a chapter in there, right in the middle, chapter 7, where he talks about not being able to do the things that he wants to do. He talks about this disconnect, and he says, well, this is what I want, this is where I want to be, but I find myself going in that direction. And he says it's because he's broken and he's separated from God, and that's brought, he calls it sin, something in his life which means that he's broken, and that sin not just giving him the wrong desires, but sin giving him, robbing him of power to walk in the right direction. That's what he said the problem was, that there's sin in his life, and what sin does, it doesn't just give you the wrong desires, he said, not just the wrong intentions. We often got the right intentions, but what sin actually does is it robs us of the power to walk in the direction that we really want to. And although the gap between our intention, what we want to do, and our direction, what we actually do, even though that's kind of explained at its root because of because sin come into the world and we were separated from God, and so we're still broken to some degree. I've found that when you look at modern research and kind of psychology and the way people are wired, that it actually really helps to flesh that out and understand how how sin in our lives works out at a practical level. And here's what modern psychology says. It says there's two reasons why we might struggle to have our direction, our intention to be the same. And see if these resonate in your life. The first thing that it reveals is that we have a bias for the present. All right, so what's happening right now is much more valuable to us than what happens in the future. That tends to be the way that we're wired. And that explains a lot of things. It's why saving for your pension isn't very exciting compared to spending some money on a new phone right now. Logically, having a pension so you can live well in your old age makes much more sense than having a fancy device in a logical sense. But in reality, we value the present much more, so that when we're making decisions, it gets distorted. That's the same with eating. It's why we would eat something unhealthy now and there's consequences in the future, because we value the present much more. And interestingly, most things that really matter in life, most things that are really worthwhile happen later. They're not instant. They take a long time to come, which means that there's a disconnect between intention and direction with that bias to the present. And the second thing that psychology has kind of revealed, which helps us to understand a bit about sin and how it works in our lives, is that when we have good intentions, it can make us feel good and trick us into thinking that we've made progress. That when we have good intentions, it can trick us into feeling good and think we've made progress. Where when you've got good intentions, that's no progress at all. You're still in the same place. So what this means for us is you can have a church service, or you listen to a message, and maybe you've been in a physical worship session, if you remember those, and you can be deeply moved. Or you hear a message and it really touches you and it moves you. You can leave that feeling really good. You can feel, and maybe thinking, oh, I just love you, God, and I need to do more of this, or I need to do more of that. And having the good intentions can make us feel good, and therefore we can be tricked into thinking that we've made some progress. But as James says, don't just hear it, but do something about it. And unless you do, you haven't actually made any progress. This is why, if you've had the experience where you're planned to do something, whether it's a new eating plan or a structure for your life or your finances, and if you make your plan very elaborate, all right, and you've got lots of colour stickers and maybe you've got highlighter pens, and you spend a long time making this fantastic plan for your new life, and you can feel so good about it, and you can think you've done so much progress, that robs you of the power of actually doing anything. The way that we're wired, it can trick us. That we've made good intentions and plans can make us think that we've made progress. And the way to kind of get round those two kind of negative aspects is the first is the present bias, that we value the present much more. It's to keep having a vision of who you want to be. Keep thinking about your future. Who's God calling me to be spiritually next year? Who's God calling me to be in my relationships, or in my finances, my health, or whatever it is? Look at the characteristics of the fruit of the Spirit, a person of kindness and gentleness, and let that be your vision, and let that be always before you, and let God lead you towards that, and for that to become really a big shaper in your mind and in your life. It is one way that you can correct the kind of present bias. And the second thing around how do we get over just thinking that we've had good intentions and that's a sign of progress, when actually, unless you're doing anything about it, it doesn't take you anywhere. And probably the thing about that is to always have this lens of obedience, or the lens of action, whenever you're engaging with kind of Christian things, or podcasts or messages or church or even home group, to think actually it's not success, it's not a fruitful discussion unless it leads to action. Just talking about stuff and having good intentions makes us feel better, but actually isn't what discipleship it is. It doesn't lead us to spiritual growth. And it's almost having a new lens that success, in a way, if you want to use that word, success is when it leads to action rather than just feeling good or feeling better. Okay, I know that I just ran through those two things really quickly. You might want to rewatch that bit and think about it a little bit. But now that you're in a place where you're motivated for action, and you're thinking, right, I'm listening to this video, and success isn't whether I liked it, it's whether I did anything about it, and you're not focusing on the present, you're thinking actually of your future you, then I've got an action for you. I've got an exercise that I'm going to invite you to do. And I want you to name different areas of your life, and you can pick what areas, but you might want to think about your relationship with God. You might want to think about your kind of impact, your ministry, key relationships, your finance, maybe your health. There may be other areas. And I want you to write those down on the side of the paper, and I want you to answer two questions about each area. And the two questions are, what's my intention in this area, and what's my direction? What's my intention for my relationship with God? What's my intention of what I want it to be like, or my impact, my ministry? What's my intention of what I want that to be like? And then think about what's my current direction. Where am I currently going in that area? What am I actually doing about impacting others or using my skills or talents? Or what am I currently doing about my relationship with God? And then I just want you to compare the two and see if there's any disconnects between what you want in that area and how you're currently living. And then I just want you to pick one and do something about it, and just pray through it and focus on one action, focus on doing something, whatever God might be saying to you. Not necessarily what I'm saying, but whatever God might be saying to you. And just be open to that. That's the exercise. Different areas of life, and think about what's my intention in that area and what's my direction. And is there any disconnect in any of those? And what could I do about it? Where do I need to change direction so my direction matches what I actually want to happen in that area? And the passage I read from James earlier on, he goes on to say something else. And this is James chapter 1, verse 25. So he's talked about the mirror. He says, don't just listen to God, but do something about it. Don't be like somebody who just looks in a mirror and then doesn't do anything about changing things. And then he says this in the next verse, 25. He said, but if you look carefully into the perfect law that sets you free, meaning God's word, the Bible, and if you do what it says and don't forget what you've heard, and then it says this. It said God will bless you for doing it. God will bless you. God will bring good things in that area if you do it. Now, I don't know if you've ever thought, I'd really like to have the blessing of God. I'd like to have more God's blessing in my finances, or in my relationship, or in my ministry, or in my church, or in my town, or wherever it may be. I'd love to have God's blessing. And you think, how do I get God's blessing in that area of my life? And sometimes we can just think, well, it's just up to God. If God wants to bless, or if God doesn't want to bless, it's up to him. And in some degrees, it is up to him. But he says here, he said, well, actually, I'm giving you a very simple formula. And the simple formula is this: take action, following what I've said, and then God will bless you. So if you want blessing from God in your relationship, whichever one that might be, then find out what God says about relationships, do those things faithfully, and you'll find blessing in that area of your life. You want God to bless you in your ministry and serving others, then look at what God says about that. And if you do it, then you will get blessed. You get blessed in your health and in your finances. The blessing of God, it's not complicated. He says, do what I've said, and then that will lead to blessing. It's a bit like last week. We had the images of the houses built on the rock and one on the sand, that there's blessing because the one that stood firm was the one built around the life doing what God said. And for me, I've found this message and this series that we're on really, really helpful for me in this time of COVID. Because there's so much that I can't control. There's so much that I could worry about. And what I've found, this idea that my direction determines my destination, is to just focus on my actions and focus on those things I can control. So not those things I can't control about relationships or finance or my ministry, but what can I control? And what I can control is my actions and my decisions. And I want those to be in God's direction. I want those to be in alignment with what God's saying to me. And I find that really empowering, because it helps me get a bit of control over my life. It brings me peace about the things I can't control. And maybe that might be the case for you in this season of COVID, and we're currently in the third lockdown in the UK that we've had, and we can panic and think of all sorts of things. But why not just think about the different areas of your life? And why not focus not on what you can't control, but what you can? And what you can control is the things that you do. You can look at what your intention is in each of those areas, like that exercise, and you can look at what your current direction is, and you can make some changes. I've made some changes to the way that I structure my week, my spiritual life around fasting. I mentioned that last week. And I've made changes to my days off and being more structured. And I'm finding that that's bringing God's blessing, and it's bringing life to me. And my prayer is that that will happen for you as well. As you look at different areas of your life and you look at what your intention is and you measure that up with your current direction, and maybe you might make some changes where that needs to be. And may the outcome of that may be that God will bless you in that area, that he'll bless you for doing what he says and obeying him. Let me pray just now. We just want to pray, Father. I just thank you that in your word you've given us guidance for so many different areas of our lives, for our finances and our health and how we live, that you've not left us so that we might get lost, but you've shown us the way in Jesus' example and in his teaching as well. And I pray for each of us that we'll hear your voice today. We'll hear what you're saying. And we're not going to be people who just look in the mirror and then look away and make no difference. but you'll come and fill us with your Spirit, fill each of us with your Spirit, so that we'll have the power to match our direction with our good intentions, so that Jesus will get more glory in our lives and in our family and our churches and our communities. Amen.
By grace alone, somehow I stand, where even angels fear to tread. Invited by redeeming love, before the throne of God above, He pulls me close with nail-scarred hands into His everlasting arms. When condemnation grips my heart and Satan tempts me to despair, I hear the voice that scatters fear. The great I am, the Lord is here. Oh, praise the one who fights for me and chills my soul eternally. Only I approach your throne, blameless now I'm running home. By your blood I come, welcome as your own, into the arms of majesty. Behold the bright and risen Son, more beauty than this world has known. And face to face with love himself, whoa, His perfect spotless righteousness. 1,000 years, 1,000 tongues are not enough to sing His praise, are not enough. Only I approach your throne, blameless now I'm running home. By your blood I come, welcome as your own, into the arms of majesty. Now I'm running home. By your blood I come, welcome as your own, into the arms of majesty.
I was at an online meeting of church leaders this week, and people were just sharing about their churches and what people in their churches are doing and have been doing and plan to do. And I was just struck with this thought that in this season, the church has done really well. The church in the UK has done really well. Hope Church, our local church, has done really well. Church people have done really well in this season to care for each other and to support each other and to pray for each other. And to, as a church, we have a guy, Brian Johnston, in our church. And since lockdown, just about every week, regularly, he cooks a whole bundle of meals and delivers it or gets them delivered to vulnerable people in our community. Every week, just week after week. He did a special thing at Christmas with his, he won't want me mentioning this, but with kind of helpers around him. Isn't that amazing? And we have regular groups of people who are just caring for each other. We have a support team who pray for people and phone them. And, the church has done really well. And sometimes we just need to encourage each other, don't we? And say, we're not perfect. But actually, by God's grace and God's power, we're doing okay. And so we're grateful for everyone who's part of Hope Church and all the different things people do to support each other. Well, thank you for your giving financially, so that we can provide some of our digital resources and our staff team can provide things to encourage you and support you through digital, through our children and families ministry, so we can get resources online to support. And if you don't already give, if you want to give as part of your mission with Hope Church, then you'd be really welcome. You'll have seen the web link, hopechurchoswestry.org.uk/give, where you can do your one-off donation, or you can set up a regular giving if you feel that you're part of us as a church and you want to kind of partner and play your part. Then that would be really, really appreciated. But just be encouraged that the church is playing its part in this country, in our communities, at supporting and encouraging each other. And by church, I mean you, I mean the people who are part of that. And that's something for us to celebrate and for us to be encouraged by. And if you want to be part of what we do during the week, then go to Facebook and search for Hope Church Oswestry, and we've got a Facebook page. We've also got an online community, a group, and you'll be really welcome to be part of that. We're in the middle of a kind of health challenge through January, and if you want to be part of that, you'll be able to go into our group and see what's going on and just share encouragements with each other. But let me just pray for you. Let me pray for me. As we go into this week, that we will still be getting good news for the people who are around us. Father, and I thank you that we get to be part of a church that is doing okay, that is doing well, that is supporting people, it's encouraging people, some of our most vulnerable and isolated in groups and with individual conversations. And we just thank you that you've called us to be your body and your hands and feet in this world. And I thank you for every person watching this and their role and the part that they play. And we just invite you to come by your Holy Spirit and fill us once again for this week, that we may be sustained by your power, that we may live faithfully and be good news to those that we interact with, those that lives we touch throughout this week. Amen. God bless you all. Have a great week, everybody, and we'll connect with you next week.